Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 317, and we're going to talk about a variety of subjects, not just bird flu and eggs, but a lot of things. So let's just get right to it. So I was cruising on X and I saw this post, and it was I think it's shared multiple times, but the one that I saw was shared by Johnny Paradise at Plant Paradise 7. And this is I'll just read it to you. It's the simplest way of doing this. Farmer Joel Salatin, who is actually one of the speakers at the Ron Paul conference that I go to in August, at the end of August. This is what he said on bird flu immunity. Wow, okay. The thing that gets me about avian influenza is the response to it. In any flock that gets avian influenza, there are always survivors, many times more survivors than not. Now, you would think that if people in charge were actually thinking, they would say, we've got a flock here of chickens. Some got it, some didn't. Why don't we save the ones that didn't? We'll take their genetics, breed them, and maybe we'll actually breed in more robust immune systems. Wow, fancy that. Wouldn't that be cool? No, if you have 10,000 birds in a flock and one bird's got avian influenza, immediately by government decree, all of them must be exterminated. All of them, survivors, non-survivors, everything. Back many years ago, when a pathogenic influenza hit Indochina, remember when it came through Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and all that? The UK did some experiments. They found that if a chicken eats 2 fresh blades of grass a day, 2 blades of fresh grass a day, she doesn't get avian influenza. End quote. That was the post. And it's pretty crazy, right? Because in my head, I was thinking, okay, there should be a way. Like, I'm sure if the government wasn't in control of the response policy, that actual farmers and chicken people who raise chickens probably have a better way of dealing with this. And there it is, Joel Salatin. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that's science, right? And so, hey, all you science deniers out there, if you actually did science instead of doing this pretend government science, right? We would actually have a better society, right? Our eggs would not be this expensive, right? Because you killed all of, it's not just the chickens that we eat, but it's the chickens that are laying eggs, and you kill them all. Well, now the eggs are really, really expensive. This whole thing about science deniers, and I've talked about it several times. I couldn't find it. I went looking for when I talked about it before. But this whole thing about science deniers is always a accusation raised by the politically motivated and generally has nothing to do with science because science itself never stops. It never stops. It's always asking a question. I've even academics, right? Scholars in the humanities do this. If someone says something, you are trained as a PhD to disagree. Whether or not there are grounds that there is a legitimate reason to disagree, you're just going to disagree because, hey, that's what you are taught to do. You don't know why you disagree, but you're going to find something to disagree, all right? About which to disagree. And so the example that I think I've given before early in the beginning of this channel was a story that Stephen Hawking had shared in his book, A Brief History of Time. And it was a story from the 1980s when he and a whole bunch of other cosmologists were invited to the Vatican. And in the middle of the conference, some of the more famous cosmologists were invited to have an audience with the Pope. And so Stephen Hawking went. He's like, hey, why not? Hang out with the Pope, right? And it was John Paul, Pope John Paul. It was in the 80s, and so this was Pope John Paul. And and through an interpreter, he basically said, "Hey, great, you guys, thanks for coming, and it's awesome all this science that you're doing. sorry about Galileo because, in the 1600s, Galileo wanted to say, hey, the Earth is not the center of the solar system, it's the sun, right? So it's a geocentric understanding of the universe, of the solar system, right? That's the Earth is the center versus a heliocentric, that is, the sun is at the center of the solar system. And Galileo said, hey, I think it's the sun, not the Earth. They arrested him. They forced him to say, I made a mistake. It's the Earth that's at the center of the solar system. And they didn't let him out of his house until he rewrote, his book to say that he was wrong. And so that was a big scandal, right? Hundreds of years later, we're still saying, see, those religious freakazoids, right? They're so conservative, they're so unscientific that they locked up Galileo. And so the Pope, in his infinite wisdom, I'm sorry, in his using his position is saying, look, we are going to undo that mistake, right? Instead of going against the science, we're going to go along with the science, right? And we're going to go along with science that, that Big Bang thing that you all talk about. Yeah, we're going to call that the God event. See how we're like really in line with science, right? You got the Big Bang theory, we got creation. We're going to say that the Big Bang was the creation event. God said, let there be light. That was the big explosion, the Big Bang, and bam, here we are. But do me a favor, Pope goes on to say, stop talking about it, which is hilarious. I don't know. It's really funny to me. And so when I would say it to the kids in class, students in class, they kind of looked at me like, what just happened here? And I'm like, look, in the same speech, the Pope is trying to say that he's apologizing for what the church did to Galileo and that he's going to make sure it never happens again. He did it again, right? I mean, think about it. Where did the whole idea of the Earth being the center of the solar system come from? It came from uh, Aristotle, who's not a Christian, okay, because he lived several hundred years before the time of Christ. And so basically, imagine how did the church make this the church's position on what the solar system looks like, okay? And this is how I imagine the conversation went. So someone goes and asks their priest, hey, so what does the solar system look like? And the priest said, good question, I'll get back to you. And so he goes back and has a big powwow with all of his other priests, and they kick the question all the way up to the Vatican, and all those geniuses, they say, okay, what should we say to all of these people? And it's getting a little noisy outside in the household here. All the kids are home. It's snowing outside. But anyway, and so they're saying, well, what should we do? We don't have an answer. Scripture doesn't say. You know what? Let's go out into the world. What's the world saying? And so they go look around and say, hey, there's this guy, Aristotle. He says that the earth is the center of the universe, right? And it fits in well with our theology. So let's go with that. And so that became the church's official position of what the universe looks like. Okay. The earth is at the center, right? Because we are the most important, right? And so that became doctrine, right? And so if you were to speak out against that, then you were committing heresy, right? You were violating, going against the church, and you had to be locked up. It wasn't even from the Bible, do you see? And they protected it because Pope can't be wrong, right? And so it turns out the Pope was wrong. And so fast forward to the 1980s, and the Pope says, not going to do that again. And so what do they do? They go to scientists and they say, what's your best theory on the start of the universe? Big Bang? We'll go with that. That is now the official position of the church. In the 1980s, it wasn't, but recently, in the last 10 years or so, the Pope at the time made it the official position of the church, don't you see? It's not from Scripture. It's what some person who really doesn't care about Christianity, maybe Hubble, right? What the Bible thinks, he doesn't care about that. He's not trying to plug in gaps of Scripture. He just offered a theory of how the universe came to be. So it's a kind of an old theory by now. And so now it's the official position of the church, which sets up another Galileo for someone else to say, oh, no, that's not how the universe began. And Hawking was telling the story because he started talking about alternate theories of the start of the universe because the Big Bang theory doesn't really work, right? They're coming out with all this evidence where it contradicts the Big Bang Theory. And in the 1980s, he's saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. So he missed my lecture. So I'm not going to say anything at all. And he jokingly is saying this to say the church hasn't changed. They still don't understand science, that science never stops. I hope that's kind of clear to you, right? That science never stops. And so for anyone to say this is the scientific position, yeah, they're engaging in religion. Okay, so just a reminder of that, how if you want the worst response to a situation, then you ask the government to solve the problem, right? Because then you're going to have all these bureaucrats who know nothing about the situation, who have absolutely no knowledge, and they are now going to tell you the policy and how to handle something like this. And generally, it's the simplest, easiest order that everyone can follow, right? Because they think that everyone is morons, and so you have to give them simple orders. So instead of saying, "Oh, do this, separate the healthy from the sick, and then kill off the sick ones, but then all the survivors, just breed with those." No, no, too complicated. Just kill them all, right? And see, that's government thinking, and that's why eggs are so expensive. All right, so then now let's move on to other topics. So budget cuts. We are in trouble. We have this massive debt, and right now Doge is cutting like 1%, right, of the budget. But we have a $7 trillion budget, and it's spiraling out of control. And Peter Schiff said recently that if Trump was really consistently serious about cutting the budget, all he has to do is not sign the debt ceiling increase bill. That's all he has to do, which then forces the government to cut, right? And you don't have to do any kind of special legislation. You don't have to do Doge. You don't have to do any of this, right? But all the agencies have to now uh, cut instead of getting an increase in their budget. But Schiff doesn't get into it in that particular episode, but there's a reason why Trump wants the debt ceiling raised, right? And some people speculate it's to avoid the dollar collapse. Is that the reason? I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. It was really interesting that Peter Schiff offered, yeah, you don't have to go through all this stuff, just don't sign the debt ceiling increase bill, and then you can't, no one can challenge that, right? You might get a lot of shade, but you don't have these constitutional challenges anymore. But on the other side, Doge doing what it's doing is revealing all of this fraud. It's making all these people, call them normies, if you will, but people who are clueless to the waste that was taking place in Washington, D.C. It lets them in on the loop. It gets them really angry, but at least now they know. I found that out many, many, many years ago. If you've heard the latest, Kash Patel is now the FBI head, and law enforcement all over the country. Like I had a student, it was a while ago, but he's now a police officer down in the South somewhere, and I posted something about Kash Patel, and he loved it. Right, that's what he said. I love it. Right. And so law enforcement, honest law enforcement people, hardworking law enforcement, they love the fact that now the FBI is going to go after truly the people who are corrupt and criminal. And so one might wonder, is accountability coming? I've been saying that several times over the 300 episodes or so, that corruption gets worse because there is no accountability. You can do all the evil you want. You'll never get caught, never get punished, never have to pay anything back. So with Kash Patel at the FBI head, will he bring accountability? Before he even knew that he would be thought of, right? I mean, I was at least under the impression that, the Democrats knew how to rig the election. And so they were going to be, their puppet was going to be the next president. And so maybe Kash Patel thought that too. And so he basically spoke his mind. He said, all these people have to go to jail. He was going to if he was in that position, he was going to go after everybody, right? And so what we're talking about here is not revenge, right? and I've talked about this before, retribution versus restitution, right? So it's not revenge, it's talking about the legal consequences of bad behavior. I hope we're going to have that. He said that if once he's confirmed, the first thing he's going to do is release the Epstein list. So let's hope he keeps that promise. Pete Hegseth, who's what is it? He's part, what is it? Secretary of Defense, I think, right? He directed the Pentagon or the Department of Defense to find $50 billion to cut this year, right? That's 8% of the Pentagon budget. Cut it each year for 5 years, cut 8%, right? So obviously, if you cut 50 billion, then next year, um, you know, let's just say 750 billion left, right? Then you have to cut another 50 billion from the 750 billion. So it's 8% and then 9% perhaps, it's going to go up percentage wise as you go forward. So I'm going to quote, this was from an article published by AP News, and that was the title, Hegseth directs Pentagon to find $50 billion in cuts. Quote, it was not immediately clear which parts of the Pentagon's spending on diversity and equity programs or its spending to address climate change, such as buying alternate fuels for aircraft or making bases more resistant to the effects of extreme weather, such as the 2018 hurricane that caused significant damage to Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, would be targeted or could add up to $50 billion in savings, end quote. CBS News reports that Hegseth wants Pentagon to cut 8% from the defense budget for each of the next 5 years, right? So the AP News didn't mention that it was 5 years, right? So 50 billion every year for 5 years, right? So that would be 250 billion after 5 years. Is it a lot? Is it a little? Is it the 50% cut in defense spending that Trump had floated to China and Russia? I don't know. We have to see how this all plays out, right? Everything is just coming out so quickly, right? So it was in the headlines today or yesterday, and now we are just processing it, and now we have to wait to see the fallout, right? And maybe there's too much fat, right? And not good fat, but just waste. In past previous episodes, I've discussed how the military is just simply not ready in terms of weapons, strategy, technology, right? The Russians have better submarines now. They have hypersonic weapons. They have better jets. So come on, I mean, we're spending all this money, but clearly it's not going to where it needs to go. So why not just cut all the stuff that we don't need? The IRS let 6,000 workers go, which is 6 to 7% of the workers. ABC News says that people should expect delays with a smaller workforce. Huh? Right? That, in my opinion, if they're going to drag their feet because they have to do more work, well, then they should be fired too. Or update their system, look for better workers, whatever, but get rid of those workers too. And ABC News goes on to say, well, now it's going to take longer to get your tax refund. Now the audits that we're doing on you are going to take longer, that kind of thing. But IRS at least let go of 6,000 workers. My wife thinks that the 80,000 workers they were threatening to hire were already hired, but if they did, they would fall under the under 2 years of work category. And so maybe they don't count as part of the 6,000. I don't know. Then Javier Milei visited CPAC, I forget what it stands for, but Musk was there also as a speaker. So it's conservative party, conservative conference, right, for mostly conservatives, right, Republicans basically. And when Javier Milei showed up, he gave Musk a chainsaw. And if you don't know Javier Milei, he's the president of Argentina, and he campaigned by bringing a chainsaw to all of the meetings, all the rallies, and said he's going to take a chainsaw to the government. And he did, right? He just slashed and fired workers left and right. And it's similar to what we're doing here in the United States. Hopefully, we have the same kind of positive benefit as Argentina. Argentina's economy is turning around. The inflation has gone down, right? It was like over 100%. Now it's like in the single digits. I mean, this is great stuff. So I don't think America is the same, right, because of the reserve currency situation. But that was interesting. HHS with RFK Jr. in charge, they updated the definition of female, just in case you didn't see that. Just thought I'd give you a heads up. Also, Boeing apparently is returning to Russia for titanium. I looked it up, and the only news sources that are talking about it are Russian news sources, like saying, "Hey, Boeing is coming back," and it hasn't yet made it to the West. There's a Twitter handle called Megatron, and he talked about that as well. So I have a feeling it is actually true once that Trump has signaled that it's okay to go back to Russia to do business because they're starting peace talks with Russia. A lot of people who've been waiting, dying to do so, they called up Russia right away and said, "Hey, we need titanium," which is interesting how much we rely on other countries for a lot of our materials. I already mentioned that, what is it, a vast majority of the uranium that we need for power plants and weapon systems, it comes from Russia. So all of this Putin and bad stuff was going on while we were still engaged in trade with Russia. So that was kind of weird. There was a controversy in veteran affairs. A lot of manpower and probably lots of money was diverted to taking care of veterans and given to illegals instead. So if you're interested, you can follow up on that. So all of this good stuff, but of course, there's the bad news, which is that um, Trump apparently today said something that to the effect that he doesn't want a single building standing in Gaza because someone showed him a video of dead babies that's blamed on Hamas, right? And I believe it's the video. I'm thinking then it was a fake video, but so a lot of people believe that it was true. But I hope that Trump saying that is not true, that none of that had happened. Because if it did, then how do you do that? How do you say, yeah, killing in Ukraine is bad, but killing in Gaza is good? I don't know. It just doesn't seem, it's too inconsistent, even for Trump, but then I don't know him, and maybe that is what it is. But a lot of good things happening. Hopefully that this new little bit of news about Gaza is inaccurate. I'm hoping anyway, because it would be really a big downer if it was actually true. But that's it for this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it and you know, you subscribe, get your friends to subscribe. And if it's more convenient, you can listen to me on Rumble, YouTube, Spotify, any of those other Apple Podcasts, any of those places people can download things. And I will talk to you next time.